Here is the question that won't leave me alone. Look at a map printed in 1680, a proper cartographic document, not a scan, and you will find a place called Tartaria Magna. It occupies roughly a third of the known world. And then, quietly, it disappears. Not conquered, not absorbed into clearly named successor states with traceable treaties. It simply recedes from the record, the way a word recedes when no one will say it anymore. That recession is what first made me sit down and stay with this for longer than I intended. Tartary, spelled in a dozen ways across European cartographic tradition, was a real geographic designation. It appeared on maps from the Dutch cartographic houses of the 17th century, used to describe the vast continental interior from the Caspian Sea to the Pacific. It was not a mythological kingdom, it appeared in encyclopedias. The 1771 Encyclopædia Britannica devotes a substantial entry to it. The language describes the region as a vast country in the northern parts of Asia, bounded by Siberia to the north and west. It is clinical, geographic, confident, written as if the authors fully expected Tartary to still be there in the next edition. I want to be careful here. The mainstream explanation for Tartary's disappearance is defensible. The term was never a precise political entity. It was a European convenience, a catch-all label for poorly mapped steppe peoples. As cartographic accuracy improved, so did regional specificity. Tartary dissolved, the argument goes, because it was always an approximation. That explanation is reasonable. I held it for a long time, and you probably should too before we go any further. The history of map-making is full of placeholder names that collapsed under pressure from better surveying. There is no conspiracy required to explain why a vague geographic term gave way to more precise designations. That is simply what the advance of knowledge does. But here is where I get stuck. The 1771 Encyclopædia Britannica entry does not describe Tartary as vague. It describes infrastructure. It references trade routes and population centres with the same editorial confidence applied to France or Persia. If this had always been a cartographic convenience, you would expect the language to betray uncertainty. It doesn't. And then there is something else sitting in that same entry, something the cartographic convenience framing doesn't account for. The authors mention postal relay systems. They describe organised communication across that vast interior. These are not the features of a placeholder label. They are the features of administered territory, administered by someone, maintained by something. I want to think about what a postal relay system actually requires, not abstractly but practically. Stations at regular intervals, personnel to manage handoffs, a record system to track correspondence. Postal relay networks are among the most demanded administrative achievements of any pre-industrial civilization. They do not arise as cartographic conveniences. The Mongol Yam, the postal relay network established under Genghis Khan, is among the best documented examples of precisely this kind of infrastructure operating across the same continental interior. It covered thousands of miles. It moved information faster than any contemporary European system. The question is, what followed it? And when the record of what followed it went silent, there is a strand I want to lay alongside this one. The Jesuit cartographers who mapped Central Asia in the 18th century, including Jean-Baptiste Régis, whose surveys were incorporated into D'Anville's 1737 atlas, were technically rigorous men. They measured, they described. Their work remains among the most precise cartographic documents of the early modern period. What those survey maps record along the western reaches of the routes includes relay points and stations whose administrative lineage is not fully clarified by the surrounding historical documentation. The Jesuit surveyors were not speculating, they were recording what they encountered. What they encountered has not received a fully satisfying accounting in the standard scholarly literature. Now let me bring Nikola Tesla into this, not as a dramatic pivot, but as a logical one. What Tesla attempted in 1899 at his laboratory in Shoreham, New York, was not without precedent in the engineering imagination of the time. Tesla believed the Earth itself could conduct electrical energy, that wireless transmission was achievable engineering reality, not theoretical curiosity. Tesla's notes, held at the Nikola Tesla Museum in Belgrade and partially at the Library of Congress, describe a system he called the world system. Electrical resonance in the Earth's crust, he argued, could power receivers at distance without physical connection. He was not a crank when he wrote those notes. He had already demonstrated alternating current at commercial scale. J.P. Morgan pulled Tesla's funding in 1903. The reasons were commercial. Without a metering mechanism, Morgan could not charge by the kilowatt hour. That is the official account, and it is well documented. Tesla's correspondence confirms the withdrawal. The Wardenclyffe Tower was demolished in 1917, sold for scrap. I am not disputing any of that. The record on Wardenclyffe is clear. The timing of Wardenclyffe's demolition is worth noting separately. It came down in 1917, mid-war, officially for scrap and debt repayment. The explanation is plausible. But what was demolished was not just physical infrastructure, it was the only documented, publicly built, working prototype of a metering-free electrical transmission system in the modern era. What I am asking is a different question. Tesla described his world system as building on existing knowledge of Earth conductivity. In his technical writing, he references principles he believed had been understood incompletely before him. The question is where those principles came from. What prior practice Tesla was inheriting when he described his system as a recovery rather than an invention. Think about what it means for a scientist of Tesla's stature to describe himself as recovering rather than inventing. Invention, in that era, was a competitive commercial asset. Recovery was not. You do not describe yourself as an inheritor of ancient principles unless you have a specific reason, personal, intellectual, or documentary, to believe they existed. I want you to think carefully with me here, not ahead of me. The Tartarian free energy hypothesis, circulating in various forms across online historical revisionism, makes a specific claim that architectural infrastructure in old photographs of Central Asian cities reveals energy harvesting technology embedded in domes, spires, copper fixtures, and tower geometries. That claim deserves scrutiny before acceptance. Most of this hypothesis does not survive contact with the engineering literature. I looked for physical documentation, recovered technical drawings, material analysis of structures, spectroscopic evidence of unusual metallic composition in architectural fixtures. I did not find it. That absence matters, and I will not pretend otherwise. An interesting idea that leaves no physical trace is not evidence of suppression. The counter-argument here is structural, not specific. We are looking for evidence in a region that was not systematically searched, using a scholarly framework that did not consider it a category worth investigating. That is a different kind of absence from the absence of Roman remains in Roman Italy. The difference matters, and it matters in a specific direction, but absence of documentation is not the same as absence of activity. This is the distinction that keeps pulling me back. What the Tartarian hypothesis gets wrong in its specifics, it may be gesturing toward in its structure. The question it is trying to ask, was there a coherent technical tradition in the Eurasian interior not fully transmitted to the Western record, is not unreasonable. Consider the Silk Road. The trade routes running through Central Asia carried not just silk and spice, but technical knowledge, paper, gunpowder, the magnetic compass. All of these moved from east to west along routes that ran through what European cartographers labelled Tartary. We accept that the Silk Road transmitted goods and ideas. We are less careful about asking what else it carried. There are engineering historians, serious institutional ones, not internet revisionists, who have written about the sophisticated mechanical engineering of Central Asian civilizations in the medieval period. Al-Jazari's Book of Knowledge of Ingenious Mechanical Devices, written in 1206, documents machines of a complexity that surprised European engineers when translations became available centuries later. That book came from the same continental corridor. I am not arguing that Al-Jazari's mechanical genius proves a Tartarian free energy tradition. I am pointing out that the engineering sophistication of the Eurasian interior was real, documented in primary sources, and systematically underrepresented in Western historical pedagogy. That underrepresentation is not a conspiracy. It is a curricular legacy of colonial historiography that privileged European innovation narratives above older ones. And Al-Jazari was not alone. The hydraulic and mechanical knowledge recorded in medieval Persian and Central Asian manuscripts, some held in the Bibliothèque Nationale de France, others in the British Library's Oriental collections, describe systems that presuppose a long prior tradition of applied physics. These manuscripts cite predecessors. Those predecessors are not always traceable. The lineage goes somewhere the surviving record cannot follow. When a sophisticated technical tradition cites predecessors it cannot name, one of two things is happening. Either the authors are mythologizing a golden age, which is common in medieval technical literature, or there is a genuine antecedent tradition whose documentary record was disrupted. Distinguishing between these possibilities requires evidence that, in this case, the record does not clearly provide. This matters because the Tartarian free energy hypothesis is usually framed as a physics question, whether certain structures could harvest electromagnetic energy. That framing is almost certainly wrong in its specifics, but beneath it is an older, more defensible question. Why does Eurasian engineering sophistication vanish from the European intellectual record so completely? Now here is where the pattern begins to feel less like scattered coincidence. The World's Columbian Exposition of 1893 in Chicago, known as the White City, deployed electrical illumination on a scale never previously achieved in public architecture. Powered by alternating current, it marked Tesla's decisive victory in the War of Currents. More than 100,000 electric lamps lit those grounds. What interests me more than the fair itself is the architectural uniformity of structures built by contractors with no shared prior aesthetic tradition. The buildings shared stylistic elements, columned facades, domed central halls, specific proportional relationships that architectural historians have noted and not fully explained. The official account credits lead architect Daniel Burnham with enforcing a Beaux-Arts standard. That is partly true. Burnham's planning philosophy, documented through his papers at the Art Institute of Chicago, emphasized historical precedent over personal originality. He studied ancient Roman and Greek monumental architecture extensively. Several architectural historians have noted formal similarities between the White City's buildings and pre-European traditions further east, similarities the Beaux-Arts framework alone does not easily account for. Frederick Law Olmsted, who designed the fair's grounds and lagoon system, was a methodical planner not given to vague reference or mysticism. His involvement alongside an architect who drew explicitly on untraceable ancient visual grammar, is itself worth noting. These were precise, technically trained men. When precise men describe reaching for something they cannot name, that deserves more than a footnote. Early photographs of the White City are still, today, occasionally misidentified online as images of an earlier civilization. That misidentification is a documented phenomenon. I am not presenting it as proof of ancient origins. I am noting it as a data point about visual continuity. Burnham was reaching towards something older than the Beaux Arts. He succeeded in touching it. He did not record what it was. Here is the coordination problem, and it is the most important point in this entire inquiry. If there was a tradition of technical knowledge, whether related to energy transmission, electromagnetic principles embedded in building geometry, or any other suppressed engineering lineage, its suppression would not have required a named conspiracy. It would have required only shared institutional interest in a particular historical narrative. Universities, patent offices, engineering societies, professional journals, none of these institutions needed to coordinate explicitly. They all shared the same economic assumptions about scarcity and metered delivery. An energy transmission system that cannot be metered is not merely a commercial inconvenience, it is an existential threat to every infrastructure investment model built on the premise of controlled scarcity. The silence organizes itself. Institutional interest is its own gravity, pulling editorial decisions in the same direction without any single hand on the wheel. You do not need a conspiracy when you have an economy. You need only shared assumptions and the quiet filtering that follows from them, generation after generation, in tenure committees and patent offices and journal editorial boards. And this is where the skeptic has their strongest ground, and I want to give it full weight. There is no evidence of a meeting at which Tartarian technical knowledge was formally suppressed. There is no document ordering the erasure of a prior energy tradition. The machinery of institutional forgetting does not usually produce such documents, but the absence of a smoking gun is not the same as the absence of a pattern. These are different claims requiring different kinds of evidence. I am not claiming the first, I am pointing at the second. The question is whether the pattern is the kind that deserves a name, or whether naming it would be the mistake. I want to pause here and be fair to the full weight of the counter-argument. The most direct challenge is this: if Tartary possessed advanced energy or transmission technology, where are the artifacts? We have Roman aqueducts, we have the Antikythera mechanism in Athens, we have Byzantine engineering manuals in the Vatican Library. If Tartary had comparable technology, where is its physical record? That is a serious question, and I do not have a satisfying answer. What I can say is that the Eurasian steppe interior has been among the least archaeologically surveyed regions on Earth relative to its size. Soviet-era archaeology in Central Asia was extensive but operated under ideological constraints that shaped what was sought and what was reported. The post-Soviet opening of those archives remains, through the early 2020s, incomplete. But I also recognize this is precisely the kind of reasoning that can rationalize almost anything. We haven't found it yet is epistemologically weak. I hold it lightly, not confidently. The honest statement is this: the physical evidence record is genuinely incomplete, that incompleteness is documented, and I cannot tell you whether it points towards something suppressed or simply reflects the difficulty of surveying frozen steppe over centuries. What I keep returning to is Tesla's own language. His world system operated on the premise that Earth itself was a conductor, that the planet had natural electromagnetic properties that could be harnessed for transmission without wires. That premise was rejected by the Western engineering mainstream of 1900, but it was not invented by Tesla. His notes reference prior art. His language is consistently that of rediscovery. Rediscovered from what? From whom? Tesla spent formative years in Europe, passed through technical communities in Vienna and Paris, before arriving in New York in 1884. He was fluent in multiple languages and read voraciously in scientific literature, not available in English translation. What was he reading? Whose prior work was he quietly inheriting when he called the principles of the world system older than himself? I do not know. I want to say that plainly. I am not claiming Tartaria had free energy technology. I am not claiming the White City was built on suppressed Tartarian engineering knowledge. What I am claiming is narrower and, I think, more honest. The official history of energy transmission has a gap in it where prior art should be, and that gap is neither small nor incidentally located. The word Tartary appears in 1771 with roads and postal systems described with confidence. It recedes from cartographic use by the mid-19th century, precisely as the industrial energy economy is being organized and monetized. Tesla emerges in the 1880s, carrying principles he describes as recovered. Wardenclyffe is funded, then defunded, then demolished. The pattern is consistent. Each element, taken alone, is explicable. But I have learnt to be as suspicious of perfectly tidy explanations as I am of dramatic ones. The tidiness of an explanation is not always evidence of its completeness. Sometimes it is evidence of how little pressure that explanation ever had to bear. Consider what it means for a geographic designation to disappear precisely as the energy economy it might have represented becomes commercially significant. That timing could be coincidence. History is full of coincidental timing, but when the timing is this precise and the geography this relevant, coincidence becomes a harder position to hold. I am not telling you what to conclude. I am not sure what to conclude myself, and I have been sitting with this much longer than I want to admit. What I am telling you is this: the standard account of energy transmission history is not the complete account. Something is missing from it. The silence around prior art in energy transmission may not be the silence of things that never existed. It may be the silence of things whose existence became inconvenient. No one needed to order that silence. It was simply more comfortable than the question, generation after generation. And the shape of what is missing is itself a kind of evidence. Negative space has contours. The gap between what Tesla claimed to be recovering and what history records as available for him to inherit has a specific outline, one that maps onto the same geography, the same century, the same institutional moment. What strikes me most, sitting here at the end of this, is not what was lost, it is what the loss resembles. A vast geographic designation with documented infrastructure, gone. A prior technical tradition that Tesla names but cannot cite. Architectural grammar that Burnham calls ancient but cannot trace. A body of Eurasian engineering knowledge that medieval manuscripts reference but cannot follow to its origin. Each disappearance has a different explanation. Each explanation is internally coherent, but taken together, these absences all face the same direction, toward the same gap in the record, at the same historical moment, in the same corner of the world. There is a door here. I cannot see past it, and I am not going to pretend that I can, but I know the shape of it, the edges formed by what is missing, the proportions defined by what was defunded, demolished and dissolved at precisely the moments when it mattered most. The longer I stand in front of this door, the more certain I become that the question it conceals is more important than any answer I could offer. Some questions need to stay open. The discomfort of not knowing is not a failure of investigation. It is the investigation, still running,